So the great topic that we've been exploring is secondary means for perfection. So we said that there are internal means, and also we've said there are external means, right? So John Kostick, illuminate us. When we talked about internal means, we said there were two types of internal means because one affected one of our powers and the other affected other of our powers. Do you remember that distinction?
Our will and our...
Yeah. We said one of those means affect our intelligence and the others affect our will. Do you remember... Okay, Greg wasn't here. Sarah, do you remember any of the two means that we spoke about that affect our intelligence, our secondary means for perfection?
Examination of conscience.
Good job. Examination of conscience is one. Emily, do you remember what was the other mean that affected our intelligence? That was...
Intelligence. Okay.
Yes.
Examination of conscience. Is that presence of God? Or
Yes.
is that, okay.
Good job.
That was so good.
Yes. Those were the two means that affect our intelligence that we spoke about. Okay. Now let's think about the secondary means that affected our will. Helena. No, you already answered. Howie, do you remember any of the means that have to do that affect our will?
Fidelity to grace.
Good job. One is fidelity to grace. Okay? Ben Bates, give me one. You can do this. You can do this.
I've been trying to think about it. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Desire for holiness.
Yes, good job. She's new and she's, come on, Ben. Desire for holiness.
I don't want to call it after someone said that one.
Who remembers the third one that affects your will? Desire for holiness, fidelity to grace. What else do we talk about? I forgot myself.
Is that plan of life or is it different?
No, that's different. What else do we talk about? Do you want to check the WhatsApp group?
Yes.
That's what he was doing.
That's what he was doing, right?
Is abandonment.
Yes, conformity to God's will. Good job. Good job.
Sending her a live update.
Conformity to God's will. Okay.
I remember that. It doesn't matter.
Yes. So these are the three talks that had to do with the will. Now we're talking about external means, right? So external means, external secondary means for perfection, the one that we talked about last time. What was the last talk, Danny?
Plan of life.
Plan of life. Good job. So we spoke about plan of life.
One thing I
What's P
remember.
of G? Plan.
Presence of God. Okay.
It's just different.
Yeah. So today we're going to speak about an external mean that can be a great encouragement for holiness. And we're going to talk about spiritual reading. Okay? So let's read. Let's go this way. Emily, do you want to read the first paragraph?
Right. The second external help on which we must support our efforts to progress in the Christian life until reaching perfection must be
Recording.
I was like, must be the attentive and assiduous reading of stimulating and encouraging books. They are a very effective aid for prayer and serve to instill noble ideals of improvement and progress in the understanding and to ignite the sacred fire of love in the heart. This very important point should never be neglected in the regulations of our life plan, giving it the maximum possible time according to the obligations of the state itself.
Okay, so I want to start doing, let's say, a distinction between the different forms of reading that we can have in the spiritual life. So I think there is the reading that we do when we're praying, right? So a reading that we do when we're praying. The sort of reading that we do when we do Lectio Divina, for example, right? And that form of reading, when you're doing mental prayer, that sort of reading has a particular way of practicing that reading. And the way that you do it is, it's very thorough and deliberate, and you go basically one line at a time, right? So for example, if you ever take the gospel to your daily prayer, normally what you do is, the gospel is very brief, and you kind of go line by line to try to find where God is speaking to you in every single line. So when we're talking about spiritual reading, we're not talking about the type of reading that we do for meditation. Okay, we're not talking about that sort of reading. We're thinking about reading as an additional spiritual practice besides prayer. Does this make sense? So the sort of reading that we're talking about is not the reading that I do when I do my mental prayer. It's an additional spiritual practice to my mental prayer. Then I'm saying, when you do mental prayer, how do you read? Basically, you go line by line, right? I'll give you an example. When you do the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius, he will expect you to do 1 hour of reading, 1 hour of prayer, and he will give you 2 paragraphs, right? So you don't have a lot of content, but you kind of go very thoroughly through each line. Spiritual reading is similar to the type of reading that we do with prayer, but not the same, because it's not so slow. It's a little bit more continuous, right? Okay, Danny, do you want to read the title and second paragraph? Do you want to hold this?
Oh, yeah. Usefulness and importance. The beneficial influence of a good book is incalculable. He is an excellent friend with whom you can talk whenever you want, who sets before us the examples of the saints, condemns our indifference, reminds us of God's judgment, speaks to us about eternity, dispels the illusions of the world, responds to the false pretexts of self-love, provides us with the means to resist our disordered passions. He is a discreet monitor who warns us secretly, a friend who never deceives us, a judge who decides impartially, a prophet who announces the truth without flattery or flattery.
That's a typo.
Oh, okay. It is not importunate, since we take it or leave it when we please, nor contradictory, since he offers us his thoughts without disputing ours, nor indiscreet, since he gives us his advice without knowing it, if we follow it or not, nor susceptible to envy, because it leaves us free to disagree with its advice, to prefer that of another.
Sure, right. So basically what we're saying is, a great secondary mean for perfection is having every day, besides your prayer time, a time to read something that builds you up. A time to read something that stimulates your intelligence and stimulates your will to be moved to pursue what's good and what's holy and what's meaningful. Right? So, how do I practice it? When I was in the novitiate, when I had more time, I had my special spiritual book for reading, and I would set my timer, and I would sit down and I would read for 15 minutes. A special form of reading. Just reading a spiritual reading. Not praying with the book, just having a spiritual reading. What do I do now? Before I go to sleep, I got my Life of the Saints next to my bed, and I just read as much as I can before I fall asleep. Right now, for example, I'm reading the life of Maximilian Kolbe. Small biography about Maximilian Kolbe. But I always have with myself a Life of the Saints, or something that builds me up spiritually. For example, earlier this year, I read the book, The Life of Mother Angelica, that I thought it was really awesome. I also read a book on St. John Chrysostom recently. I always have a spiritual reading with myself, right? So the idea is that you need to find something that stimulates your intelligence and your will towards something that's good, all right? Because think about it. How many things are we intaking all the time? How many podcasts or how many maybe TV shows, Netflix, how many things are we allowing to come in through our senses into our soul? And that's okay. I mean, there's a space for entertainment, certainly, and there's a space for relaxation. But then the question becomes, is there a proportional space in my life to read something that builds me up, to read something that moves me and renews me towards holiness? or am I not intaking anything that really moves me to something good? So that's what this spiritual practice is, to have a deliberate and special time for reading something spiritual every day, even if it's just before going to sleep. Sorry, you want to read third paragraph?
Main books. Not all spiritual books have the same value in sanctifying effectiveness. The first place is naturally occupied by the Holy Scriptures, both the Old and New Testament. In the wisdom books of the Old Testament, we find a sublime advice. In the Psalms, unsurpassable formulas of prayer. In the prophetics and historical books, fruitful teachings for the government of our life. Not all souls, however, are prepared to address certain biblical landscapes of the Old Law, and that is why the approval of the spiritual director must be obtained before proceeding with this reading. On the other hand, everyone can read with great benefit the divine teachings of Jesus in the Holy Gospels, the admirable examples of the apostles and the early church, the sublime conceptions of St. Paul, and even the wonderful predictions of the apocalypse. The Holy Scripture has been and will always be the pursuit source of spirituality that God has made available to men.
So, okay, I disagree a little bit with the author. I think that scriptures always has to be our first option when it comes to prayer. I think that scriptures always has to be our first option when it comes to prayer. When it comes to spiritual reading, I don't enjoy reading scriptures. So that's just my own sense. But maybe if you guys do your own experiment and you enjoy doing your spiritual reading with scriptures, great. But I think my personal experience, scriptures can be a little bit, the spirit, like what moves you to devotion is not so readily available as it is with other spiritual readings. But what I would at least say is, I think, guys, if you are having your time for mental prayer every day, that's the place where you have to go to scriptures, right? I think that if we are to be exposed to, I think that hopefully we get to be exposed to scriptures every day, and I think that the place where we get this exposition and nurturing of scriptures should be mental prayer more than spiritual reading. Do you want to read the next paragraph? Mark?
After inspired books, reading the lives of the saints is the most stimulating of all. Living examples of their heroic virtues excite admiration and stimulate effort to reach those heights. These kinds of books had the effectiveness of turning a soldier wounded in body and battered in soul into a Saint Ignatius of Loyola.
Yeah. So with this, I agree 100%. I think that the life of the saints is really superb. I think, listen, reading the life of the saints, first of all, you get a little bit of historical context. So reading the life of the saints, you get to know a little bit more about history, though I don't think that's the main point. But I think that just being exposed to their practice of heroic virtues, that's something that can be really stimulating. So, yeah, I really enjoy reading the life of the saints. What life of the saint have you read recently? Who of the saints do you know? What life have you really delved into and be enriched by his example or her example? And I think the life of the saints is the interpretation and the incarnation of scriptures. So this is a beautiful idea. Who can really open up the scriptures for us? Is it the Bible teacher that knows 100 languages and knows every single interpretation of every word? Or isn't it the saint that really interprets scripture with his own life? And my sense is that the real person that opens up scriptures for us are the saints. They are the ones who interpret scriptures with their own actions. So I think that a beautiful spiritual practice is to always have a life of the saint with yourself. Always know the saints. Be acquainted with them. Get to know them better. I have learned so much from the saints. And I always try to incorporate in my homilies the life of the saints. Like, this is the idea And this is how it looked like in the life of a saint. Because again, they are the ones who open up scriptures for us. They are the ones who give us the true interpretation of scriptures. So I can say that really in my preaching, I feel that my preaching is so enriched by the examples that I can bring in from the life of the saints, because they truly show us how is it that passage of scriptures can really look practical in our lives. And again, their example is so stimulating. I just said one of the gifts that I received recently, reading the life of Father Menor. He's not a canonized saint, but I think truly that he practiced heroic virtues. And reading over and over again his life, it has permanently the same effect on me. It really moves me to say, I want to be better. That's what we need in spiritual. We need a spiritual reading that every time we close that book, we say, I want to be better. I want to love God more. For example, right now I'm reading the life of Maximilian Kolbe. He was such an exceptional person. He had such a profound devotion to our Blessed Mother. So he received the inspiration that he had to found a group called something like the Knights of the Immaculata, like the warriors of our Blessed Mother in the Immaculate Conception. And look what he did. When he was recently ordained, he started to print a magazine, the Knights of the Immaculata. And the first time he printed like 600 copies. This man was so tenacious and so relentless that he built a whole monastery with one of the most important printing press in all of Poland. And he was so successful in his endeavor that he had the biggest monastery in the world. He had over 700 friars living with him, all dedicated to the printing press. There were only 13 priests in the monastery, and all of the brothers, they led their religious life, but they were all working. And he recruited so many talented friars that they came up with a lot of patents of how to improve the printing technology. Like that's the life of the saints right there. Like they have a vision and they pursue that vision. No matter the cost. Guys, he took this mission to Japan. Like those are the lives of the saints. They're unstoppable. Because what moves them? Love. And love can be the greatest force in the world. So, how much do we know about the life of the saints? How many saints do we know? How many life of saints have we read? Something beautiful when I joined PES, so when you join the novitiate, you're going to be in the novitiate for 3 years, right? So they give you a list of books that you have to read, about 20 books each year. The first year, the postulant year, the only thing you have there is Life of the Saints. That's all you have to read, Life of the Saints. So I really delved into the life of the saints, and I kept that great practice for my whole life, and I intend to keep it with me. How would you want to read the next paragraph?
Then come the ascetic mystical works, with a practical orientation, written precisely to encourage the piety of the faithful. Among them, the soliloquies by St. Augustine occupy a preeminent place. The Imitation of Christ by Kempis, the works of St. Teresa, St. John of the Cross, Father Granada, Father Rodriguez, Father Lapuente, Blessed Avila, St. Francis de Sales, and St. Alfonso Maria de Gorio.
So, this is the order, right? You got scriptures first place, second place life of the saints, third place spiritual and ascetical authors. Spiritual and ascetical authors are also really good. They're really good readings. So it's not only good to read the life of the saints, it's also good to read the writings of the saints. All right? The writings of the saints are also very encouraging. I know that a lot of people enjoy reading Story of a Soul of Teresa of Lisieux. Other people enjoy reading St. Francis de Sales, who's also a great saint and a great spiritual author. So this is what we Catholics, we have to be nurtured by this spiritual reading. We have to know these authors. They're meant to really feed our spirit and feed our intellect. For example, all of these meditations, where did I find them? In my spiritual reading. I was reading Theology of Christian Perfection, the best spiritual ascetical book out there. The best one, unsurpassed. You won't find anything better. It's from a Spanish author. And that's where I found all of these meditations. All of these things, they come from a spiritual reading. And I enjoyed it so much that I said, I want to share this with more people. But one thing is to share it, but what would really be a success for me is if you go yourself to do these readings. I think that as Catholics, you need to know, obviously, the main things about our faith, right? But you guys are not expected to be theologians. But I think that what you are expected, because you're called to be saints, is you need to know spiritual theology. Because that's what's going to really move you to be saints. So of all the things that you need to know about Catholicism, the most important things are the things related with spiritual growth. Life of the saints, spiritual ascetical writings.
The soul must choose in each case, in agreement with its spiritual director, the most suitable and convenient book for its current dispositions and needs. The best is not always the most convenient for a soul, and there are books that can provide us with incalculable services at a certain time in our lives. They may not be so useful and even inconvenient in other circumstances. In everything, discretion is necessary, said St. Teresa. And so, for example, timorous and scrupulous souls will be prohibited from terrifying or exaggerated books, which could increase their illness. Sensitive souls and lovers of sweetness and consolation will be given to read The Climb of Mount Carmel by St. John of the Cross and other similar books so that they become accustomed to eating bread with crusts. As the Venerable Father Granada said, that is, solid and substantial delicacies, and so on in other similar cases.
Yeah, so I think it's important when you're going to choose a spiritual reading, like speak with someone who knows. So you are taken progressively from something simple to something complicated. For example, there are certain authors that I would discourage you from going straight to them. St. Francis de Sales, he's not so easy to read. St. John of the Cross, you won't understand anything if you jump straight into him. So the best place to start is Life of the Saints. But once you've done a little Life of the Saints, you should start reading spiritual and ascetical authors. But I do agree that it's important for someone to guide you and to let you know what's the right reading for you at this moment of your life. Do you know that there are people who discovered the faith and turned to the faith just through spiritual readings? Have you heard about this great Saint Edith Stein, Saint Therese Benedict of the Cross? You know, so she had a long journey towards the faith, but who knows what was the reading that really took her to take the final step?
Something by Teresa of Avila, right?
She said that she encountered Teresa of Avila. Teresa of Avila, she wrote many books, and one of her books is just called Life. It's about her life. And Edith Stein, she was a philosopher, right? She was a really reputed philosopher. She was the only female philosopher among the great names in Germany in those days. But she said that the day that she encountered Teresa of Avila, she read the whole book in a night, and when she closed the book, she said, "This is the truth that I've been seeking my whole life." And she was a Jew, and she turned Catholic. That's the book that really moved her to take that step. So, not only do spiritual books make St. Ignatius Loyola go from a soldier to a saint, but even a Jewish philosopher encountered faith and turned Catholic because of the fruits that you can encounter in spiritual readings, in reading the life of the saints. Molly?
After choosing the right book, it is of capital importance to know how to read it well. Spiritual reading is not a study, but an exercise in piety. If we go to it in search of lights, it is to nourish the heart and feed our prayer.
No, it's all good. So, what the author is saying is, you're not meant to go to, when it's time for spiritual reading, you don't go to spiritual reading just to know more so you can teach more. You don't go there to say like, wow, look at me. Look at all the spiritual books I've read. He's saying the point of spiritual reading is to nourish the heart and feed our prayer. That's why we do the spiritual reading. We don't do it just to study and to increase our, let's say, amount of knowledge that we have. We do it because we want to nourish our heart and feed our prayer. Gavin, you want to read the next paragraph?
The important thing, then, is not to read a lot, but to properly assimilate what you have read. We must insist repeatedly on the same passage that has impressed us, in order to impress it strongly in our spirit. 5. It is necessary to react against the temptation to believe that this amounts to a waste of time. How time is wasted is, on the contrary, reading too much and poorly. You need few books if you know how to read, said Father Lecordaire.
So it's not about reading a lot, but it's about making sure that what you read really goes deep. So what I do sometimes is, hopefully you have a book that moves you. So you read, and then you find something that moves you and you say, okay, I don't want to keep reading. I want to stay here for a while with this idea. I really want this idea to sink in. So it's not like, how many pages I can read when I do my spiritual reading. No, it's just like, go calmly, and when you find something that stands out, stay there. It's similar to prayer a little bit. But it's not about how much I can cover, but it's how deep what I read can go.
We must also fight against inconsistency and fickleness, which pushes us to change books before finishing the previous one or just starting to read it. This procedure is neither serious nor fruitful, and it also has the disadvantage of having a deplorable influence on the formation of our character. Unless we suffer an unexpected temptation or an unforeseen need that has arisen in our spirit, that a book other than the one we are reading can shed light on it, we must continue reading it to the end.
That's why I would say, don't choose long books. Don't choose long books. And I also disagree a little bit with the author. For example, if I'm 100 pages into a book and that book produces nothing in my soul and it doesn't move me, I'm not going to keep reading, because the whole purpose of the spiritual reading is to find something that moves you and encourages you. And I think that's not inconsistency. I think it's just seeking for something that moves you better. But I think there is a point of not changing every day what you're reading, but you know what I mean. Last paragraph.
Finally, since reading is closely related to prayer, it is necessary that both exercises go hand in hand and benefit each other. It is very useful to go from prayer to reading and from reading to prayer. In this way, the annoyance and boredom that could be produced by excessive prolongation of either of the two is avoided. The ideal is to mix both things in such a way that they do not constitute more than a single occupation with different nuances. Use reading to gain new strength when prayer begins to decline, and frequently interrupt reading to let your heart vent in brief ejaculations and ardent aspirations. In this way, several hours can be spent almost imperceptibly in these holy and fruitful exercises.
So, I'm going to bring this to a very practical application. Sometimes people take holy hours. And a holy hour can be a very long time if you don't know what to do. So what I would do if I were you is, when I do my holy hour, I would assign, for example, 15 minutes of that holy hour to spiritual reading. Right? Spiritual reading. And I would do that at the beginning of my holy hour, because I think that spiritual reading can bring you to a place where you feel more inclined to pray. Right? It's hard. Think about it this way. You're busy, your whole day you're working, cell phone, You come to the chapel. It's hard to be recollect because you've been doing so many things. So I think that the first thing that you could do when you come to the chapel, if you're taking a whole hour, is take 15 minutes to do a spiritual reading. That calms you down, that brings spiritual matters to your head and to your heart, and then after 15 minutes, move into prayer. Start speaking with the Lord. But instead of just jumping in to speak with the Lord, so I recommend a lot of people, before they start to pray, I say do a spiritual reading. do a spiritual reading that really kind of settles you. That's what I did in the past. When it was my time for prayer, I know, what if I do 10 minutes of spiritual reading and then I go into my time of prayer, and I found that exercise really, really useful.